feel better than I deserve. And I now know that I can't just take it from this thing. That when the fever spikes, you just want to curl up in a ball and stay there for the next 6, 7 hours. And you can't. You've got to bundle up your clothes. You've got to, start drowning yourself in fluids. You got to take your Tylenol and you got to get after it. If you don't want it to get into your lungs, you got to force yourself to breathe. You got to get up off your ass. You got to walk around. It hurts. You don't want to do it. Everything in your body is telling you not to do it. And it's lying to you. And I know that now. And the more I do, the more I push myself to do, the better I'm getting. So I'm going to take faith in that for now. I know I'm not through it, but that's good. Let's talk about the collective, though, for a second, though, and I'll get back into what I sent you with the chest x-ray. The numbers could be flattening of the curve. My brother, the governor of New York, said today. How do we distinguish flattening of the curve from a potential lag in numbers because of the waves in testing?
It's a great point, Chris. I mean, you're going to have the confirmed infections first, followed by hospitalizations, and then followed sadly by deaths. And so there is the lag. Obviously, the testing itself is a lag because by the time someone gets tested, that usually reflects an exposure that's 10 to 14 days earlier. So there's another lag there. So you're absolutely right. I think you got to follow the trend for a period of time. Nobody knows the exact right answer here, and you shouldn't believe anybody who tells you they do because we haven't seen this before. This virus behaves differently than other viruses that we've seen before. It's a novel coronavirus. But, I think the trend is starting to look like it is flattening out a bit. It may not be this apex, so you have this point in time at the very height. It may be sort of go up and then you plateau for a while and then you come back down. That's possibly what's going to happen here. But it does look encouraging right now, and it sort of fits the models as well. Quickly take a look at the model for New York. When you look at these models, Chris, you've looked at tons of them. I spent all weekend looking at them. The model is a big shaded area, frankly. That's gives you just I don't know if we have, there it is, a variety of possibilities there. But near the bottom, that dotted line, we're still in the solid line, but that dotted line is what this is looking like it's going to be, which is, still high, but it's encouraging, as I think your brother put it, Chris, is sort of redlining
Right.
here. I mean, getting very close to using everything that they have, but still, within the capacity of the healthcare system.
And one of the sad realities is that they're not having as big a crush with ventilators as they expected because so many people are succumbing. I think that we really don't figure out how this thing kills us yet. We're seeing funky things with young people. We're seeing funky things that it does in its lungs, in people's lungs, where they're starting to intubate people on their stomachs now, which they don't usually do, to try to create more, air passage for them. Because most of the lungs, obviously, this, Doc, you told me, but most of our lungs are in our back, not in our front. We always think that they're here in the front, but they're in the back, and they're trying to make adjustments now.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. We are getting a better sense of what's happening with this particular, infection. I mean, but you're right. I mean, is it the virus itself that's replicating over and over again and eventually, overwhelms the body, leading to multiple system organ failure, or is it the body's reaction to the virus itself? Somebody who's young and healthy, as you point out, they should be able to fight the virus, typically. But in fact, the body reacts so strongly that in fact it's the inflammation that ends up being a problem for the person and what the clinicians are trying to treat. I'll just tell you quickly, Chris, I mean, this raises this whole issue about even hydroxychloroquine, this medication that so many people are asking about. It's sort of an immunosuppressant, right? It's used for things like lupus. It's to dampen down someone's immune system that is hyperreactive. Well, that could work well if the problem is a hyperreactive immune system. But what about somebody whose immune system is weak? And that's why they're suffering so much with this disease. Then you might actually end up harming the person. So that's the challenge here. That's why you study these things, Chris.
Now, I know that the president's saying it doesn't make it policy necessarily, but deflecting responsibility for testing couldn't come at a worse time. We now know that if the federal government doesn't have a heavy hand in testing, Sanjay, it's just never going to happen. You're never going to get to scale. So what do you take from the president saying today, not only something that is raw in its complete contradiction of what he said a month ago, but basically absenting the federal government from having a big hand in testing and saying it's really hospitals and states?
Look, I mean, this is one of these things, Chris. I think you and I have been talking about for so long now. I mean, a couple of months at least, where we said, look, we see this coming. We know exactly what needs to be done. Not just us, obviously. The public health officials say, in order to basically understand this virus and how widespread it is, you've got to test. And the policies that were put in place by the federal government early on really diminished testing. Don't really test somebody unless they've just returned from China. Don't test somebody unless they've come in direct contact with someone who's known to have coronavirus. That's not how you get surveillance. We were never set up initially to actually have surveillance on this. By the way, there were countries around the world that did do this. South Korea, everyone always gives that as an example. The reason why is they had good surveillance. Germany had good surveillance, and you can see that they had good or much better results because of that. It is a bad disease no matter what, and I'm not going to minimize that part of it. But in order to do the best that you can, we needed to be doing more advanced testing earlier on, and that was really some of the directives coming from the federal government. Now public health laboratories, now commercial laboratories, now university hospitals, now all these private laboratories, and they need to come on board, and they are. But this isn't something you can catch up on like sleep. We're behind, and we stayed behind on this, as you just pointed out, even in New York.
And you need the guiding hand the same way you do with the purchasing power for the states. And the only reason I harp on it is not because I want to keep going backwards. If you don't learn the lessons of the past, you will repeat them. And we know we're going to have another wave of this. And if the politics allows this to become about non-accountability, that the Fed gets a pass on testing, it's really states, we'll wind up in the same place. Now, in terms of where we don't want to go.
That's right.
If you have coronavirus, in most of the cases, your big fear is that it's going to get your lungs. That's what it wants. It wants your lungs, this thing. So this weekend, I had the fever start to go down a little bit, and I started to feel it come into my chest. So I went to get a chest x-ray, and I want you guys to see this just so you can see what we're looking for and not, okay? Now, Doc, obviously you understand this. What we're looking for in the lungs are big white areas. What are the terms that people will hear? What are they looking for? And what do you see in this mighty expanse of chest in front of you?
Well, I mean, you're right. I mean, one of the things that you'll hear is infiltrate. Do you have an infiltrate in your chest, in your lungs? And that's basically a collection of inflammatory fluid. I would look for those in areas where the black areas are the air in your lungs. I would look for some of those black areas to essentially be filled with white spots. And I just want to make it clear for the audience, I'm not diagnosing here from afar or via television. Chris and I talked about this earlier today, and he obviously had his own doctor look at it as well. In the middle of the chest x-ray there, you can see you have a little bit of infiltrates, and you can see this on, this is the side view now. You'll see in the sort of middle of the film there is your spine. You see those sort of domino-looking bones, awfully small, I might add, Chris, for a big guy like you, in the middle of the spine there, and then in front of that is the x-ray of your lungs. And it looks pretty good. Maybe a little bit of fluid build up there, but not something that I would definitively call pneumonia, which is what they're trying to diagnose. Pneumonia is not just diagnosed by a chest x-ray, but it's one of the tools that doctors use to diagnose it. So it looks good. And again, just make it clear, I'm not diagnosing Chris via television here, but that it looks pretty good. And I looked at that more closely on my computer today.
Right. Look, and I had different pulmonary people look at it. They take very gross readings, because it's either really pneumonia or it really isn't. And they expect me to have infiltrate because I have the virus. And I have to tell you, it is scary to have your lungs go up there and see this stuff and be like, well, what is that? What is like that smoke in there? And they tell you, yeah, it's the virus. It's in there. It's in you. You have to fight to keep it out. And, I'm doing fine. I don't have pneumonia. But if I want to stay that way, I got to have some things fall in my favor.
Yeah, I think you make a good point, Chris. I mean, obviously, you're getting doctors who tell you, look, you should take it easy. I obviously was counseling you last week even, why don't you take some time off? And I think you make a good point that you need to keep your lung, you're doing these pulmonary exercises, these breathing exercises, which your doctors have advised you to do. And that can be critically important as well.
No high heart rate,
no real
strenuous
exercise.
Anything. No. but just getting my lungs and doing the breathing is more than I can handle right now. But I believe in it. I believe in it as a discipline. That if you want this out of your lungs, you're going to have to keep it out of your lungs. And if you just lay on your ass, you're going to get it. I believe that. The cases I've been hearing, the longer people lay down, Sanjay, the more trouble they have.